Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Richard Lewis Show. Today, a fantastic guest, someone that I haven't even done a podcast with them in years. I think last time I was still sponsored by Rivalry, and our lives have gone in incredible different directions. But we've come back, we've come full circle because we're here to talk about the glorious death of esports. It is the great one. It is PPD. Peter, thanks so much for being here. How are things? Let's start there. Let's catch up, actually.
Yeah, things are relatively good. I think I had, some transitioning out of a professional esports player career is not the most glamorous thing. I think I that was a big challenge for me, and I think I'm finally starting to get, my legs back underneath me, getting that momentum and confidence that, fulfills my day to day. So right now I'm doing great.
Yeah, look, it's a weird time in the esports industry, that's for sure, and I get it that right now there's been these like mass layoffs, and there's lots of like hand wringing about, what a terrible time it is, and what a shame. And I don't know about you, brother. I'm kind of like not there. I'm not going to these pity parties because I am seeing, first of all, a lot of assholes. Frankly, a lot of people that it's very hard to have sympathy for when they're fired because they were part of that, man who voted for the leopards eating face party was surprised by leopards eating his face, dog shit meme that everyone posts on Twitter. There's lots of those guys. But also as well, just like the bloat on these companies, and I know these people don't do a lot. There are like people who are like really worked hard, and then there's like people who, because of cronyism, get to cruise. And these cuts have been merciless in the sense that they've got everyone. And so I don't know. I kind of feel like it was necessary and had to happen. That's kind of where I'm at initially. So I don't know where you're at with that because I know you're
Um,
building something different we're going to talk
yeah,
about.
I'm right on board with you. I mean, I love your
Yeah.
esports doomer content. I tune into your stream, drop some memes in the Twitch chat, try and stir up
Yeah.
some drama and stuff. I'm right there with you. Right, I got into esports back in 2011 is really when my career began. We were playing for a couple $1,000s, and then I was just very, very fortunate to sort of rise in this meteoric moment of esports when my salary was doubling every year. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're playing in $1 million tournaments. Things got crazy, right? And when things got crazy, that it was a trending industry, and as with trending industry, that's what kind of when the grifters come in
Yeah.
and they start standing up pretty questionable projects and companies, and they attract a lot of outside capital or dumb money that really leads to just more problems than it's worth. So esports was kind of that trendy thing in 2014 to 2020. I would say COVID kind of kept it alive for a little bit longer, and then after that, right, it was wow, like where's the money, right? Where are we making money on all this stuff? And
Yeah.
publishers realized that esports really wasn't helping them generate revenue. They'd actually taken on most of the responsibility. Many of the publishers took on a lot of these responsibilities in house, which made them even more costly and expensive. And yeah, so there was a big calling these past couple of years. Things are changing. Esport programs are adjusting, becoming more humble, which I think is appropriate because nobody during these past 10 years has been incentivized to figure out how do we make money because their customer was investors, not like people. I mean,
Yeah.
investors are people, but you see what I'm saying, right? Like they were chasing
No,
the
no,
next
totally.
raise, not
Yeah.
revenue.
That's what used to piss me off. I one of the things that I really noticed when I knew we were at tipping point and esports was about to tip the fuck over was when people didn't celebrate getting sponsors anymore. They celebrated raises. This is what they would talk about. You would go to these meetings, and you know what I'm like. You've seen me. I'm a social butterfly. Whichever room I'm in. Well, it's great to see you all. We'll be calling you all assholes later because you probably are. But thanks for having me. Because you have to do that in my line of work a little bit. But they would all be the same. Oh, we raised 20 million. We got another raise coming. We got another raise coming. We raised another 20 million. And it's like, okay, cool. It's good that you're able to raise all this money, but I'm looking at your company and I know you haven't built anything with that money. I know you haven't made these like wholesale changes that you need to be sustainable. So when you spent that 20 million you got in the angel raise or whatever, and now you're raising another 20 million, what did you do with the first 20 million? There's got to be some accountability. And there never was. Like, no one ever asked that question. Everyone was like, well, they must have spent it on good things, but they didn't. And that can only last so long. I mean, and it did. And then people were like, okay, 3 years in, we want a fucking return. And they went, oh, well, there's none of that. There's none of
Yeah.
that.
I think that's one of the tricky parts of building a business in an industry. There's a lot of really big or seemingly successful companies that don't actually generate positive revenue, and they are sort of reliant on raise after raise after raise. And ultimately, it's hard to tell like what is their KPI of success. You know, are they trying to build a revenue positive business, or are they just trying to have impact, or are they trying to increase their reputation or grow their clout, or I don't know. There's like Uber, Netflix, these wildly successful popular companies, like they've never been profitable yet, they're ginormous and they continue to exist. So it's a tricky world. It's not super simple, or it's not cut and dry, so to say. But um esports are just a bunch of amateurs really who were able to get some big raises and some big money. And we kind of started entering like that, almost like that tech money sort of like salary range. Like esports executives were doing like 6-figure salaries and things, which were really inappropriate based on of their actual revenue numbers.
Yeah. I mean, dude, like, it's so wild to me that it, it it's like it's a great mystery as to how we got here. Like, people are like, "Wow, like what changed?" And it's like, no, I'll tell you what changed when the money came. Like, dude, I remember at the start, like I used to talk to these team owners, and they would be like, "Man, if I just had 10 million, I could build something for life." And you got and that was why we used to talk in 2005 to like 2010, and then it became, oh, okay, well, if I could get like 20 million, and then it's like you've had 60, you've had 100, you've had 150, you've pissed it up against the wall, you hired like your friends, sometimes like your partners, into these 6-figure roles and did fuck all. It's like actual insanity.
It was a big like
um
race to the top, right? Like how can we become the biggest, you know, best, achieve the highest competitive results? And that's done through having the best rosters and the best players. And how do you do that? You pay them more than what the other guy is willing to pay them. And that was ultimately like an esports company, their costs are like 90% salary. And a lot of it is the players. And so when they're constantly just fighting each other for these best players, those numbers increase year after year after year. And they're faced with this very, very difficult task of sort of trying to monetize these guys while enticing them to work with them. Right. So they'll be generous. They'll say, hey, we'll give you guys a house, right? We won't take any prize money. We'll give you guys all these boot camps and give you guys the best training. We'll get you a coach, an analyst, a mental health coach, a psychologist, right? All these things just to achieve those competitive results. And then they think that if they have these competitive results, that's going to lead to revenue streams, which some teams kind of figured out, but most of them, 90% of them, really never did. And that's,
well, no, because it doesn't. That's where, I mean, I think sports is waking up to this. But in esports, we've never even had the kind of idea, the concept of the glory supporter as a sort of revenue stream. To explain what I mean by that, I know you don't, but maybe some of the listeners don't. You will see these cyclical influxes of child fans for whichever team is successful in the decade, or that they're growing up. And when I was a kid, it was Manchester United, and we were just coming off the back of Liverpool. You could literally divide the sort of early '80s kids and the mid '80s kids based on whether it was Liverpool or United. You fast forward, and then it's Chelsea because they get Abramovich and they sign all these players. And then you fast forward a little bit more, and it's Man City. And that's great because they're buying shirts, they're buying merchandise, they're pestering their parents to put the game on TV. They want to go to the matches eventually. This is the rites of passage you go through. And then eventually you do it with your kids. That's the great sustainable part of stick and ball sport. Now, when in esports, you get the glory supporter, as in, I like TSM, they are the bestest in league, so I like them. Right? You get that moron, but you don't, that moron doesn't then go, and because of that, I must have a TSM jersey, and I must go to the games, and I must raise my kids to buy TSM merch. None of that happens. So ultimately, success is worthless in esports. That's the real black pill that people have to swallow. That you can have the best team in the world, you can spend all that money on the salaries to get the best 5 players on a team, and it means nothing. It means a lot for the players, but it means nothing for the business. You would actually be better off getting like a team that just implodes all the time, that you can make great content around, and then you sell that content to sponsors. That'd be way better than actually winning a tournament.
Yeah, that's really the challenge I think most of these teams have faced is how do we create authentic fans of our organization rather than have these like transient fans that really just support the players that are on the team. So when Arteezy, right, when he goes from Evil Geniuses to Shopify, does EG retain any of those fans? I don't think so. I think they lose close to 100% of those fans, and that's because their loyalty was to Arteezy, not the organization, because the organizations don't have they don't have proper storylines. They don't have a soul, right? They don't have a. There's no. Why would you be a fan of a corporate C-suite, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which, I mean, even then, back in the day, it sort of worked when we had the first influx of like the CEO bro, they're just esports potheads that started a company that, kind of blew up.
yeah, and there are some teams that have done that decently well. Like I look at OG. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but OG with like no tail, right? He was an ex-professional Dota player. He won 2 TIs, and then and then he was the CEO of the company. And whether or not he actually works that much on it, it doesn't matter, right? Because now his fans are fans of that organization, but he can't really leave, like he can't go anywhere. So they've got to keep him happy regardless of how much work he actually feels like doing in order to sort of, keep the story going, which
Yeah.
does work.
Yeah. And it kind of does get weird because the fans, like, they get hypercritical of orgs that don't spend. Like, I've had OG execs come on the podcast before, and we've talked about stuff. And it's like, I think when they went on that min maxing and they were trying to discover like Dota talent, for example, with like ATF, and when he was announced, and he was a bit of a pub hero. And everyone was like, who is this? I actually think that's like, I want to see more of that in esports. I want to see sensible scouting and getting players that offer value beyond what I have to give them in a salary. Like, if you're a 90% player, but the difference between a 90% and a 91% is an additional $100,000, I don't give a fuck about that 1%. And I thought OG would be trying to be pretty smart, and it didn't work out necessarily, but it's the right thing to do if you've got the capability to do it. But when you looked at the fan reaction, because obviously OG have all this prestige in Dota, they were like, nah, this ain't it. We don't vibe with these players. And that's another problem, There's this expectation from the fans that if you ain't spending vast amount of money, are you really a successful org? Do you really care?
Yeah. And this is where we have lots of like freemium fan experiences, right? Like it's a lot of these fans don't really put any money into the organizations. As you mentioned, they're not really buying the merch. They're definitely not converting on the sponsorships, right? They're not buying, I mean, maybe they buy some Red Bulls or, something, but they're not buying, maybe they buy a keyboard, right? It's like, okay, there's $200. Maybe I spend $1,000 on Red Bull, probably not even that. And those guys, like the conversions are just so bad on esports that a lot of these sponsors have just left. And that's partially because the teams were mostly trying to keep their investors happy rather than their actual partners. But the conversion rates are really, really bad. And sponsors have just realized that like they can get their money, they can get better conversion rates elsewhere, which I think has been that sort of shift to gaming entertainment, right? Targeting influencers in the space that, are maybe maybe they're close to esports, but they're not esports pros because esport professionals are just such bad brand ambassadors by and large that they don't really, bring the fans to the product, or they don't create that like trust relationship with enough fans to incentivize those fans to pull out their credit cards and actually purchase something. Now, I don't know where you want to go with the direction of this, but we're on conversion rates, and I think sports gambling is worth kind of talking about. Like
Sure, yeah.
it has absolutely consumed not just esports, but all of sports entertainment at this point. Like I'm sure I watch a little bit of like American football and
Mm.
basketball, and it's
I just
all
got
sports
fucking
betting.
wrecked. I just got wrecked in the championship games, mate. I picked both fucking losers on some
Yeah.
accumulator and got absolutely fucked. So yeah, I'm
So
feeling really good about sports betting right now.
it's yeah, and sports betting has kind of taken over because even though the conversion rate I still think is small for fans, the margins on those conversions is uncapped, right? A fan, isn't just going to stop after he buys a $200 keyboard, right? He's going to lose five, 10, $50,000 on sports gambling, and the costs of that gambling company to sort of, put up a website to facilitate this are much, much lower than, physically producing an object, shipping it across the world, all these things. So sports gambling has just made those margins. They just can't compete with them, right? So those peripheral companies, they want to come in and do $20,000, $50,000 deals, where these betting companies are saying, "We'll give you 500K, we'll give you $1 million, to throw a logo on your jersey," right? These other companies just can't compete in that landscape, and now so they just leave, right? They're more interested in those like one-off activations and trying to make their little tiny budgets work. But these gambling companies are
Mhm.
like, we'll fund the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
we'll run our own tournaments, right? You don't need any other sponsors. We got you. Like in Dota, we have teams that are literally just Bet Boom. That's one of the teams, and that's a gambling site. That's the name of their team, right? That's it. And it's I don't think it's necessarily bad, but you can see how teams, because they're competing for salaries to acquire the best players, they're kind of forced into this position of working with these companies, which I don't think is completely evil, but it's really just become all about how can we push sports gambling onto our audiences because that's where the most money lies. And people gravitate towards, they're running businesses, right? They're trying to make the most money possible.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, so I don't know where you're at with just the idea of sports gambling because I do notice Americans, in my opinion, generally have a much more almost puritanical view about gambling in general than Europeans. Like I grew up, it's just part of working class culture in Britain. Like you would just get sat down
Hmm.
in a bookies while you would watch your uncles gamble on the horses or whatever the fuck. Yeah, I used to go to the dog track. It just is part of like life where I grew up. So I never had an issue with it, and I don't have an issue with it now. I have an issue with the unregulated betting sites, and I know everyone goes, yeah, but those some of the licenses you get are barely you just pay money and you get them. It's like, yeah, well, that's the industry standard. I mean, is gambling a clean industry? No. But what I do find amusing is when people sort of pick their poison and they go, all gambling sites are bad, or they go, this one is bad and this one isn't. They all do the same thing. If you go look on Trustpilot or whatever fucking review platform they're using, one of the number one complaints is I don't get my money. They let me put money in without checking my, details. And then when I uploaded my details, they said they weren't valid and they kept the money. You will just read this a million times. It's one of the dirty secrets in the industry that there is no legal obligation to pay out your winnings. Now, you can talk about that in a broader context and what that means about an industry that has this fundamental consumer abuse at its heart. But ultimately, I'm at peace with it. Like I just can't. I'm looking at the Saudi Arabian sellout. I'm looking at fucking the Chinese state data mining people through video games. I'm looking at these kind of like terrible decisions being made at the cost of people's lives. I can't come along for the outrage on the
No,
sports gambling.
I'm at peace with it too. Like I think
Yeah.
in America, gambling was wild. Like it was pretty illegal when I was growing up as a kid, like across the
Yeah,
country.
right. Yeah, of
But
course.
it's becoming. I think gambling is legal in about 50% of the states, at least at this point. And I think esports gambling is legal in about half of those states. So we're like in that like 25 to 30% kind of place right now, and we will get to the same place that everywhere else in the world is. I think our politicians are just figuring out how to regulate it so they can make as much money as possible. Um,
Of course.
yeah, it was the same thing with like weed and legalizing drugs and stuff. Like it's just a matter of time for when the politicians can get their piece essentially. So yeah, sports gambling is just, I was just more so bringing it up, but like that's sort of that's the esports business model that, we're talking about esports sort of going out and dying. And, these are kind of the lifelines that are being presented that are keeping it um, above ground.
Which again, I would have no issue with it. The problem is, right, so here's what happens. Um, Individual promotes gambling. Like when Arteezy was sponsored by some slot company or whatever, and he was just like, in his like 10-year fucking queues that he has to wait just to get one game of Dota. He's just playing slots and everyone's going, wow, rock bottom for Arteezy. How dare he? And then you look at their flair, and it's a team that's like almost entirely funded by a betting company. It's like, I don't know how that person can exist, but they do, and there's lots of them. And I've been called out. Oh, Richard, you're a moral person. You speak out about Saudi Arabia. You've been sponsored by multiple gambling companies. Yeah, because I know where my moral threshold is, and I believe, I don't know, beating a confession out of somebody till they say they're gay, then putting them in prison over it. I think that's just on a different level to, oops, we kept some of your money. I'm sorry. Like, I'm weird like that. Um, I wouldn't mind so much that people are taking the gambling lifeline. The problem I've had is that every grift that's kind of like wafted through esports, they've took that and said it was a lifeline and necessary. And then they take the next one and the next one and the next one. And then you end up with these, like, someone like FTX coming in, and everyone's announcing these huge like 10-year millions of dollars sponsorship deals, and it's like, guys, this is a fugazi if ever I fucking saw one. And then when they collapse, they go, oh yeah, shit, we made no plans beyond the lifeline. That's the
Yeah,
problem I've got with so many of these orgs. There is no long-term planning. It's get what you can today when you can, and then hopefully that's enough until the next bailout comes along.
for sure. Right. These are shortcuts. They're lifelines. They're, when things go wrong, right? These companies have really, they're trying to build to scale and grow their audience as fast as possible in order to compete and get that next raise. And they, when the deal goes away, right, they kind of have to abort, right? They've got to shut things down. There's not really option number two, as you were sort of trying to reference, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So look, I mean, I wanted to start with the positive. It was kind of how it was structured in my mind, but we're in the negative now.
Sure, let's go
So
positive.
yeah. No, not yet, not yet. No, we're not nearly there yet.
All right.
You obviously have been kind of on the ground floor at one of these orgs that happened, quite famously, Evil Geniuses, and I think people know. I've done a lot of reporting around Evil Geniuses when I was at COO and subsequently when I left. I think I've been instrumental in highlighting just how badly they've been run by the Peak Six group that bought them, how many fine people and players have all been worked into terrible, conditions, all just chasing a pipe dream which could never be realized because ultimately they were being mismanaged at their core. They appointed incompetent people into the highest positions within the organization. Now, I've got a lot of love for Evil Geniuses through its various iterations. I used to love sparring with Alex Garfield back in the day. Obviously, no Philip Aram, from that kind of era of it all, and have seen Peak Six run it into the ground. And I wanted to just talk to you about that because obviously, it's I think it's one of the greatest mismanagements of an esports property I think I've ever seen in my history of reporting around the space.
Yeah, they definitely expedited its death. I think they definitely helped out there. So yeah, EG. I grew up in high school. I was watching StarCraft 2 esports. The MLGs. I think MLG Rally is really like watching Idra and Huck and Thorzane and all these StarCraft 2 guys. That was like, I love that. Right. I credit a lot of that to like inspiring me to sort of try to get into esports and go pro. I would never play StarCraft. That game's way too hard, right? Warcraft 3, 1v1 RTS.
Yeah.
That's a dead genre for a reason, right? It's too difficult. But yeah, I grew up watching them, and I was, very, very lucky to be able to join them in 2014 as a Dota player. I got to learn so much about esports by joining, the most successful esports team at the time. And when I say successful, it really is the most funded, right? They had Monster Energy and Razer, who were kind of like huge, kind of endemic sponsors in the space. There was
Yeah, almost. Yeah, yeah.
non-endemics didn't really exist at that period of time. Monster, I think, arguably is non-endemic, but they were really brought in and they were significant partners, which helped bankroll EG and grow their company. Right, they got all the best players. They were the bad boys. They made great content. Right, remember the EG StarCraft house in Arizona with In Control and Idra and all those guys. Like really, really heyday of esports. Right, I got to join their team and a few years after I joined their team, 2014, I think it was 20, right after we won TI in 2015, they sold to Twitch and we all moved to San Francisco. And Twitch, bought the company for millions of dollars. And all of a sudden, EG, the rich get richer, right? They didn't just have the best brand deals. Now they've got this, investment, this unlimited budget to go out there and build the best esports team ever, right? Which is what Alex Garfield thought he was about to do. But all the other esport team owners were like, "Wait, you can do that, right? You can take investment. This is how like amateur like the industry was. Like that was not an option for anybody." And they all led this brigade essentially into Twitch and said like, the main streaming platform for esports cannot have an esports team. This is a conflict of interest, yada yada. Basically, jealous that they didn't have the funding to
Yeah.
compete anymore. And Twitch listened, right? They backed down, right? And Evil Geniuses was essentially shuttered as a business from that day on. When I joined EG or when we joined Twitch, EG never signed another roster, right? And they were kind of hoping it would just die. But the success of the Dota team really kind of kept it as like a premier esports organization. And so, we went through 2015, we went through 2016, and they were like, how do we, we don't want this thing anymore. How do we get rid of it? Right. And so they essentially gave the company to me and my teammates. And then they also gave Alliance to Loda and his teammates. And we were kind of like on our own. And it was kind of I don't know, it's just really unfortunate, right? I mean, Alex Garfield was really the heart and soul, I think, of EG, and his
Yeah,
company
absolutely.
his company was basically taken away from him, and it was really, really, it was a really sad story, I think. And we took over. I was kind of put in a tough position. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but
No, no, no,
my
no.
teammates didn't want to play with me anymore after we got third, first, and third at the international 3 years in a row. They decided we'll just kick the captain. We'll kick the leader. Surely he's not important here. We'll get rid of him. None of them ever won a tournament again, by the way. And yeah, I became the CEO, which is kind of
Yeah.
crazy, but I was always like a leader within the team. And I was always very curious about how to run an esports team. What do we deserve to get paid? Right. I was asking the right questions and they needed somebody to be the CEO. So I kind of stepped up. If it was up to me, I would have hired a CEO instead of myself and
Yeah.
continued as a Dota player, which
I
is
think it makes your position in any team that you wanted to have beyond that point like kind of super difficult to balance because of the power differential.
ex-
If I was playing for a captain who's also my CEO, I'm in a different headspace for sure.
100%. And then
Yeah.
also, when I became CEO, the other four stockholders, right, were my ex teammates who basically stabbed me in the back. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a complicated dynamic, which is one of the reasons that I left the company after a year and went back to being a Dota player.
Mm.
So that's like where Phil took over, and I just, I went and joined Optic. Right, I joined that Infinite group, played
Yeah.
Dota for them for a year. That obviously did not last, and then I went
No.
over to NIP and played with them in Sweden up until COVID, which is where we were actually about to get on a plane to go to the LA Major, and then Trump announced the travel ban the day before our flights, and we were like, okay, I guess everything's on pause, and that's kind
Mm.
of where yeah, it's kind of where my life took a shift. Tried to.
Yeah, I mean, it does also sound as well you were doing like a fucking tour of terrible orcs. Like, to be fair, it's actually spectacular. It's sort of
There's
the
not that many
infinite
good
growth.
ones, you kind of
Yeah, I
go.
know. Actually, maybe that is the lesson. Yeah. So I'll just focusing on EG. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what was going on there that you noticed was changing,
Sure.
and kind of how it went into the death. You were there at the early days of the death spiral, essentially.
Yeah, so when we took over EG, right, we were handed a company that had, I think, like $2 million in costs, and 80 to, I would say 90% of those costs were employee and player salaries, right? We didn't actually have any assets, right? We had like a team house that we paid rent on, and that was pretty much it. And our revenue was actually in control of Twitch. We signed a partnership deal with their team. This is one of the reasons that Twitch acquired Good Game, because of their ability to acquire sponsorships. They basically gutted the Good Game partnership team, onboarded them to the Twitch partnership team, and so we continue to work with their partnership team while I was there, and I think for a few years after. I think it was like a 3 year or 4 year deal. I'm not sure. But we essentially were not in control of any of our revenue stream, right? 90% of our revenue was sponsorships, and it was really up to Twitch to bring those to the table. And really, Twitch was kind of the bosses, and I was making sure I was just, rerouting paychecks essentially. So the company, didn't really, I think we were relatively even, like 2 million costs and 2 million revenue. But we didn't really have like a path towards how do we make more money, right? How do we grow this business? We thought like, what if we sign a good team, right? Maybe we can go ask our sponsors for more. Um, and that was kind of actually one of my big regrets going back. Like, I think I should have just fired all of our teams day one, except for Dota,
Right.
because that was really the bread maker, and everybody else was kind of just along for the ride for
Yeah.
for the most part. That's not like completely true, but it kind of is true, I think, looking back. So, yeah, I decided to jump ship because I really wanted to go back to being a player. I didn't feel like my career was over. Phil took over, and we were looking for opportunities to sell the company. We were actually talking to Infinite about like moving to Dallas, and I think EG was positioned well to be that team instead of Optic initially. But when they told me they wanted to get into Overwatch League, I was like, I'm not going to go raise. Originally, we were talking about raising 20 million and applying for the LCS, and then they were like, "Oh, we want to raise 40 million and go into Overwatch League." And then it's like, okay, well, how much of the company am I going to own at that point? And they're like, "Well, you're going to own like 3%." I was like, "What? No, we're not doing this, right? Like, this is crazy." So I just killed that deal and walked away. And then I didn't really play much of a role in the sale of Peak Six. I was kind of already moved on to just playing for Optic and NIP at that point. So I was very much just like a AFK sort of shareholder, and they sold the company. I was glad to, finally have my equity transfer into dollars, and
Yeah.
I said goodbye, right? So I survived esports, right? I made an exit, which not many people are able to say, I think.
Well, it's getting out at the right time. That's the skill.
Yeah, I
I've
got
I've
lucky.
got the same sensibility. Yeah, maybe it's luck, maybe not. I mean, I think people you have to have a certain forthrightness, because to walk away from something is always super difficult. And a lot of people are in these states of almost like, they're arrested development. They don't want to necessarily jump to the next thing in case it doesn't work out. They don't take risks, and they stagnate, and then they get got. And that's generally how a lot of promising esports careers kind of end. They get comfortable, and then they get fired one day over some, it's nothing they did. It's just layoffs. It's cutbacks. And then they're
Yeah,
on Twitter, oh, blue, 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 fucking I've
yeah.
got all this experience, please. And it's like, you could have been in some insane startup if you wanted. You could
I
have done
have
something.
I have all the experience, right? You just heard it, right? I've done
Yeah.
literally everything in esports, right? Across event production, broadcasting, playing, running an esports team, coaching, you name it. I've done it all. When I left NIP during COVID to go see what else can I do, right? I felt
Yeah.
unstoppable. I thought that I was going to walk into a sea of opportunities when I came back to America. And the reality was nobody was answering my phone calls at that point. right? Why?
Why do you think that is?
Because of nepotism, right? Anybody that were nobody's hiring a C-suite person to join their esports organization. Like it doesn't work like that. Like you have to have that prior relationship to get into that position. It's family and friends, 100%.
Mm.
So it's yeah. I mean, I could go be like an admin or something. Like it's like I could start at the bottom again, right? I could have done that, but I just kind of figured something else out.
Mm. Well, so we can talk about nouns because this is
Sure.
obviously, I get called out a lot, like you say, for the doomerism and negativity around esports. But I'm excited. I've been watching the rise of these fledgling organizations in NA. And I've been watching things like MAE and stuff like that, and obviously yourselves. And the thing I like about Nouns has been they've been very transparent, seem to be very intelligent with how they use social media, very cost effective pickups in terms of not living beyond your means and utilizing good people. Don't seem to have a high turnover of staff, particularly in those management roles. And so it's refreshing in an industry that is constant drama, constant turmoil, constant ineptitude. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, like, after everything you've been through and what you've seen and living through the esports winter, why would you sort of throw in and be part of a
Esports team.
fledgling esports org? Yeah, why would you do
Sure.
it?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like opportunities for me were relatively dry when I came back. Like I had all this experience of being an esports team owner, right? And I think that in a different world, right, if I got to hire a CEO and keep being a Dota player for EG, maybe I would have become the CEO of EG one day, and maybe we would be this successfully, hopefully cool esports organization. But it didn't really play out that way. So I've I discovered Nouns in 2022. They had picked up a Dota team in the spring, this team called Four Zoomers. They were the third best North American team at the time, which is, you're right on the cusp of being able to qualify to all the big events, essentially.
Yeah.
So they found some money right through Nouns DAO, which I can get to in a second, but they, you know, got enough money to sign this team to essentially represent Nouns Esports. Then this team started qualifying to events, and everybody thought it was really cool, and they were able to kind of raise money in a very very unique way, while many or most esport kind of companies were actually going bankrupt or doing massive layoffs. So
Yeah.
I learned about them in the fall or in the spring. I started digging in. I found out that their founder is this guy named Gage, or Sasquatch is his gamer
Hmm.
name. And he's actually used to be a professional StarCraft 2 player for
Hmm.
Complexity.
Yep.
And during my earliest days, I was a Heroes of Newerth player for Complexity. And we actually shared it. We actually were roommates for about a month or two at the Complexity Gaming Houston house back in like 2012. So yeah, I learned about them and got into a Discord group with him. And I was like, are you Sasquatch from Complexity? And he was like, yeah, that's me. I was like, oh my gosh, like small world, right? So I, started learning more about the org. They host like a public contributor call every week on Fridays where anybody can join. And I just started lending, my expertise and advice to this group that was, very, very small, right?
Hmm.
The amount of money they raised wasn't enough to go out and hire full-time staff, right? It was really just pay the players. They rep Nouns. They go to these competitions. Everybody gets to say, yes, good job. They won, right? There wasn't a desire for them to build a sustainable business, right? It was really just to spend. And that was kind of cool, right? It was just something that this Nouns DAO group wanted to do. And the years have gone by and we've submitted. Maybe this is a good place to talk about what Nouns DAO is a
Yeah.
little bit.
Sure.
So Nouns DAO is is an NFT collection on Ethereum, which is one of the most popular networks.
Hmm.
And the way that Nouns works is they sell one NFT a day, and a noun is like this pixelated PFP with these random traits. And they sell one a day forever is sort of the pitch. And every time they sell one, all of that money goes to a shared treasury. So it could be like a group bank account, essentially. And then if you have a noun, you're able to submit a proposal on what should we do with this money that we've raised. And then all of the noun holders, the people that own these NFTs, they vote on whether or not, yes or no, do we want to do what this person is proposing. And that was essentially the very beginning of the team. They raised, I think it was like $70,000 to sign the team for 6 months. Then we did a prop to sign them for 12 months. Then we did a prop to sign a Dota team and a CS team. And most recently, we did a prop to really sort of build out the organization and actually hire staff to try and figure this thing out, right? We built the brand up until this point. Our latest funding round was for 2 million USDC. So a really serious chunk of change. And
Yeah, it's a lot.
we're getting after it this year. Like we've hired, content team, partnerships. I'm stepping in like kind of like an operations, like COO role, I would say. And yeah, we're trying to do things a little bit differently, but also kind of the same. Like we're participating in all of those like Web2 lifelines, I would say. Like, we definitely want to take advantage of those where we can, but we're also trying to figure out how we can empower people to actually be fans of our organization.
Well, one of the things that, because look, again, I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I've got too much respect for you. I'm pretty sure you're aware of, I've been a vocal critic, let's say, of crypto and the big crypto wave and then the crypto crash, which
Hmm.
sort of killed esports. Obviously, the NFT stuff. I've seen a lot of grifts, and I've always believed that centrally you are relying on the greater fool theory for that business model to kind of work. And I think that's where most people have arrived at. But what I will say is about when I was looking at because I'm an open minded guy. When I was looking at how the NFT approach was being utilized by Nouns and how you are actually getting some tangible utility in terms of being able to come to one of these meetings and say, this is how I would like this new money we've raised to be spent. This is what I'm voting for. And to have that input is actually kind of like fascinating because this is something that a bunch of failed Kickstarters have tried to offer at other orgs. I think Sentinels did this, for example, where it was like, hey, the fans can now have equity, but there's not really like any sort of tangible input that you get. Whereas Nouns, I've seen the meetings and I've seen what you guys do, and I think this is really. By the way, this is something that would be lauded if it was in mainstream sports, and I know that because I've seen football teams, soccer teams for our American listeners, where they've gone bust and the fans have chipped in and ended up becoming these fan-run entities, and everybody loves that in the media. They go, it's like a fantastic story. It brings you closer to the community. Everyone's super positive about it. Obviously, because the vector for that is NFTs in this case, I suspect you haven't had as much popular press as you should probably get because people might not like the method, but the initiative is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great phrasing. Very generous. Thank you. And yeah, I think those I think they're German, those football clubs you're referring to. And yeah,
I mean, yeah, we've had them in the UK too as well.
they're
Yeah.
a huge inspiration for, I mean, yeah, they kind of align with the same ethos that I think, this and many other crypto projects sort of try to empower. So I was really busy with life. I got my first crypto in 2017 because my friend told me if I bought it, I was going to get rich, right? Just like everybody else. That's how they got
Did you get
onboarded.
rich?
I did not, right? I sold at a loss, right, on the way down
Hmm.
with many, many others. And then I completely skipped that like 2021 crypto wave that everybody was going crazy over. And that's when all the bad projects came out that scarred crypto forever. I skipped all of it, right? I got into crypto because I learned about Nouns Esports' Dota team in 2022, and crypto had already gone down like 90% at that point. So what I found at the bottom was it's just a bunch of really passionate builders who are trying to utilize this tech to create new, cool, innovative products. And what I learned is that people were actually able to generate fandom for digital IP or digital culture, right? So people are actually fans of Nouns because of the governance that they allow them, to participate in how the project is ran. So I look at, an NFT collection, for example, is kind of like an exclusive membership club. And as long as, and you can sell your noun whenever you want, right? People are buying them right now for I think like $15,000 to $20,000, which is a crazy high amount. But if you don't like what you're receiving, you can just go sell it, and somebody else will buy it for probably that same exact amount, right now. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for esport teams to basically create membership clubs that, you buy this NFT for Team Evil Geniuses. Now you're part of the Evil Geniuses VIP club, right? Then the esports team is incentivized to provide you with exclusive deals, perks, and opportunities that make you feel like holding that NFT and being a part of that club is worth it. If you don't feel like you're being taken care of, you can go out and sell it, right? And maybe you sell it at a loss, right? But at least you're able to recoup some of your initial purchase. Now, if the esport team is doing a great job and what's the word? They're over delivering, right? Maybe the value at which you purchased that, your initial purchase, maybe it's actually worth more. So you could sell it at an increased rate. Now, esports has, and sorry if I'm ranting too much. I'm just trying to get my whole
No,
idea
the
out
more
there.
you talk is always the better, brother. You go for it.
Cool. So yeah, and you can see like if an esports team is doing really poorly and they're being really, if they're being jerks, right? Everybody's just going to sell their NFT as fast as they can to get out, right? They're like, fuck this team. They suck. I hate them. I should have never bought this thing. I'm going to go sell it for 50% of what I bought it for, right? But at least I'm going to get my 50% back. And then, the fans who love it, they're just going to hold on to it. They'll be like, I'm not selling this thing. I fucking love this team, right? This is great. Look at all the fun we're having, this exclusive content and early access merchandise deals and VIP event experiences that they're providing for me. Like I love esports, right? So they don't sell it. And so everybody else is like, I want to join the cool kids club. How do I do it? Well, you got to buy this NFT, and they're at, because you didn't buy that on the initial sale, now they're at an increased price. And the way crypto works is that you're actually able to charge like a royalty or a transaction fee on the trades of your NFT. So if somebody sold, right, for their NFT for $100, Nouns Esports could say, hey, every trade we're going to take 5%, right? So we get $5 every time these memberships change hands.
Sure.
That's
Which
a
is
very
kind of like what Valve do, right?
yes,
just to put that out there. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And it's a huge part because everybody dreams of creating a digital marketplace that has cool enough products to trade. That's why like the CS skin market is like this gigantic lucrative thing, because people just love buying these cases, buying and selling these items. And the whole time Valve is just taking that little transaction, or a pretty significant transaction fee, if we're being honest. But it's a gigantic revenue stream, just, the royalties essentially on those trades. So I think, and part of that is the transient interest of esport teams. So esport teams have peaks of interest, right, at these major events. So you might want to go buy this NFT to gain these exclusive benefits for this specific event, right? But then after the event, you're like, well, they lost, or they suck, or they traded my favorite player, right? You can go out and you can leave, right? You can exit. Your money is not a complete sunken cost. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to inspire better fandom with crypto. That you mentioned the word investors, and that's the word you really have to stay away from, because NFTs are not investments; they're products. And
Yeah.
When you go to investments, that's where it becomes like an unregistered security, and you're going to go to jail or get fined.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and
see, as someone that like I completely avoided it all. Like I was
yeah,
like,
it's you got to know what you're doing.
I literally watched all of my friends when we were like doing E-League. I literally watched tons of my esports friends just become like millionaires, and they were like, "Rich, you got to get in on this, dude." And I'm like, it feels wrong on some level. I can't do it.
Yeah,
I'm so like fucked up internally with ethics and stuff that
you only hear the success stories for the most part.
also true. But I mean, I know I knew it was certainly legit when they all started cashing out, and I kind
Yeah,
of
but
felt like fuck.
even the way that you're mentioning, you know, you're speaking of speculation, right? So like
Sure.
that's sort of the problem with crypto, is that when people think of
Although I
crypto,
gotta
they
say they
think
had so many W's, bro. A lot of the time, I'm not sure it was fucking speculation. Like,
maybe it wasn't, but people's
yeah,
head jumps immediately to, is it going to make me rich? Right. And then they think, oh, this is an investment. And then they think like, oh, well, I bought crypto back in 2021 and I lost all my money. I hate crypto. Right. But what I'm talking about has nothing to do with you getting rich, right? It's about creating this cool exclusive membership club which empowers you to be rewarded essentially for being a fan of a good team. Now, what those NFTs provide is really up to the organization that is selling them and running running the organization behind it. Like we do this thing called Prop House, and our most recent initiative was we want to send a Smash player. We want to like basically recruit a Smash player to go to Genesis, which is this tournament that's in like a few weeks in San Jose, and we basically gave every member of our community an NFT, which gave them voting power. And we have like, we had like 20 Smash players submit proposals saying, hey, I need help getting Genesis. I don't have the money to go. Right. And everybody voted. And we're actually sending this player from the Netherlands over to Genesis, where he otherwise wouldn't be able to go because he couldn't afford it. And that decision was made by our community, not our C suite. So, and hopefully he goes there, represents the organization well. He's already talking about like, making some content and trying to, make sure everybody, he wants everybody to feel like they made the right choice. Right. So now
Yeah.
he's incentivized to do well by the fans, whereas most esport teams, the players, they ignore the fans, right? They don't care, right? They're
Yeah,
just there
unless
for
they
the.
got some in a bellyache about.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are smart enough to sort of diversify themselves, so they have, their streamers, right? But a lot of them don't do any of that, right? They've been pretty content just to collect prize money and salary from teams for 10 years. But that stuff, as we're seeing it, is not going to last forever. And in Dota, especially, like when Valve pulled out of DPC, right? That was a huge sort of wake up call for people. But, ESL and Saudi was right there ready to pick everything back up where they left off. So that lifeline was extended, which I was kind of excited for the grand reset, right? Going back to
Yeah,
square
same.
one. But seems like we got a couple more years to go,
Yeah, maybe more.
maybe more.
I guess it's as good a point as any to sort of bring up the Saudi stuff. I don't want you to put yourself in a quandary because it's easy for me, I guess.
Yeah, you're right.
Um,
And
it's easy for me. I'm a journalist. Obviously, I'm going to be against the Saudi Arabian state and vocally so. And even as someone that's worked esports broadcasts, there's no way in hell. I was in talks to come back and do some shows back when the Saudi buyout started happening, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm never catching that check. I'm never. There's no. I mean, again, we could have had a company funded, the content company that went on to become Last Free Nation, but that would have been Saudi money. Millions. I've walked away from millions. And
yeah,
this is why I don't understand why other people tell me it's complicated. I don't know if I am being stupid. I don't know if I've like got
I
a bit
wouldn't
of
say it's complicated. I think it's, do you want to continue participating in this web two, or sorry, I hate to use the word. You want to keep participating in esports. This is how you do it. And if you're just going to turn away from like Saudi Arabia and Russia, right? That is the future of esports as we know it. Now, I think, if you want to keep playing this crazy game where everybody makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, that's what you have to do, right? And that's just a choice, right? Some people are into their 30s or 40s, right? They're not turning around at this point. They're not going to start from square one. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity now for those, previous operators who were kind of priced out and forced to sell their companies. If they're still around, they can start these grassroots movements to sort of, build back what esports probably should look like. And I don't think we're going to have that same wave of investment that sort of distracted us for so many years.
yeah. I look. How do you square the moral aspect? Because listen, again, it's interesting. I guess I am engaged in what could be called virtue signaling behavior when I talk about the Saudi stuff and the Chinese state stuff. And I do. I say for me, I'd rather there was no esports than if esports was in some way complicit in covering up human rights abuses. That's my line in the sand. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
going to judge anybody. If you want to, I got colleagues who say this, like, look, the world is a fucked up and complicated place. I just want to do my job. I'm never going to think too much about that stuff because how do you consistently walk that tightrope? And I get that too. And so the only thing I ever really call out is the hypocrisy. and many people have dug themselves into a big hypocritical hole that is impossible to get out of. Because if you post a rainbow in fucking June and then you're off to Saudi in fucking August, fuck you, like
Yeah.
forever, right?
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm at.
You
So
should
how
stick to your
how
values.
yeah, exactly. Or they're not values at all, right?
Yep.
So this is what I mean. It's more complex for someone running an org because, as was explained by Team Liquid when they had to do their wasn't really a mea culpa, but they had to explain why they were why they were very vocally pro gay rights, and then they're going to Riyadh where homosexuality is criminalized and working with the Saudi Arabian state. They just said if we don't do that, we cease to be a competitive esports org. No one will want to play for us. We can't
Sure.
hire people, and eventually we'll wither and die. And that explanation went over well with some people and not so well with other people. So explain it to me from your perspective.
Yeah. So, world is a really complicated place. I think you said it well. I think America has been kind of held on a pedestal for a long time. I think that's partially because of like Hollywood and pop culture being, done in America, right? But we've done some really awful things as well, right? We're not.
If the American government was running an esports event, I absolutely would say don't
Yeah,
support that either.
that's a good point. And I think at that very very high level of like government sort of stuff, like what are these groups doing? They're trying to buy the love of the world, right, through esports. And that, objectively, that kind of seems like a decent strategy, right? I mean, I'm not like some politician or like some high level whatever, right? But I get what they're doing, right? It makes sense to me. Um, I think that, you should stick to your values, as you said. And if you're going to go be like super pro this or pro that, right, you should stick to those. Like it's kind of, as you said, it's very hypocritical for you to then go against it. Like maybe you shouldn't be so pro that in the first place if you're not going to back it up. And I think that's kind of where people get in trouble. So as long as you don't sort of say you're something you're not for the sake of engagement farming, right? Like uh yeah, I mean, I think you're okay. I think morally, right, like I don't want to get into all of that's, the
Yeah,
different things
I
that are
get it.
happening in Russia and Saudi, right? I do think that there's a lot of business interests and things that I don't want to jeopardize. I think we're still trying to compete and play in that sphere of esports for the time being. But we're also investing in grassroots opportunities to grow what I think is the future of esports. That is going to
Mhm.
be a much more sustainable, revenue focused business.
It's sort of interesting because from the Dota perspective, they're kind of all over the place, actually, the average Dota fan. And when I say that, yes, I'm talking about the Dota subreddit primarily. That's the only kind of forum I feel that's left where you can even get a temperature check. And if you think it's wrong of me to be so fixated on that as the Dota community, it's what Valve use as well. You post something on there, it gets
Oh, it,
integrated
it
into
is
the
the
game.
place.
Valve, yeah, it is the place for good or
It's
ill.
the biggest congregation of Dota fans anywhere.
Yeah, agreed. That's how I feel about it. And so they're kind of all over the place with this because they're very anti-gambling company, but they're kind of fine with the Riyadh Masters and fine with the Saudi Arabian state. But they're also vehemently kind of they don't want you to support Russia in any way, shape, or form, or play in any of their tournaments, or even have Russian players play in your teams. And that's predicated on the invasion of Ukraine. And again, this is like a stance I completely agree with. I wouldn't support the Russian government in any way, shape, or form either. So I've kind of put you in a quandary here because I know you were due to you got some public criticism because you were due to participate in that Games of Future Kazan Expo,
Hmm.
which obviously has money from the Russian government coming in. And I know that this got called out by many Ukrainian workers in the Dota space and the subreddit itself. So I wanted to sort of just present that to you because I honestly think as well, like optically, I think it's kind of terrible.
Yeah.
Who knows where we're at in 5 years with this? But right now, I think is kind of as a statement. I don't think it's great.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would never go to that tournament myself. However, we don't tell our players where they can and cannot compete. That's, if they feel safe and comfortable, right? We're not trying to like impose our political beliefs onto them. I think they probably didn't really think it through well enough. And I don't think that they anticipated the amount of backlash from Western communities. Um, but people are still going to watch that tournament. It's still going to be a thing. And I, I've actually started to realize this lately is like, we're kind of in the minority, I think, with a lot of this stuff, right? Like America and Western Europe are kind of the only ones that are like super against Russia, I would say. Whereas like Asia, South America, Southeast Asia, they don't really care, right? They're gonna
Well,
go.
that was the point I made. I mean, listen,
Those are some of the biggest Dota audiences.
yeah, once we start getting into true geopolitical landscapes, the American relationship of late has eroded so much with China, obviously with Russia, and we are starting to see there's these other countries, that are just like, sorry, we're not coming along for the ride. We actually think America, you're being very hypocritical in the condemnation. You too, Europe, and it does get trickier. It was like I saw Villa, was posting, and he's saying, "I'm going to make sure you all have visa problems. I'm going to fuck up your professional careers." And it's like, well, you're not going to do that to the Chinese. They don't care. The Chinese players are going to go to play where they want to play. Xi Jinping talked about this tournament. The Chinese state promoted this tournament. They're going, and all the brouhaha you're going to raise about it will not change it. It's not going to win hearts and minds. It's not going to move the dial. And we are starting to see this new world where I'm sure America's going to call it an axis of fucking evil or give it some label, but we are watching, certain countries are kind of aligning themselves in a way that wasn't happening geopolitically a while, and obviously esports is downstream of all of this stuff, so it is going to influence where we go, what decisions we have to make, what tournaments we can run, etc., etc. And I think it's never been harder actually to walk a kind of sensible straight line through all of this stuff. I think wherever you're going to step, you are going to step on someone's toes, essentially,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to
without
put
trying
it.
to
So
without trying to be flippant about it.
yeah, and one of my friends said this, and he's like, maybe competing in these events, like maybe it can sort of bring the world closer together rather than push us into our corners and
Sure,
build
I used
that
to believe that.
separation. Yeah, tell me, tell me.
Yeah, I used to believe that. I think unfortunately, um, I was a big proponent of the let's not politicize esports. I think unfortunately, sports and politics have been so interwoven historically that there's no getting away from it. And in many ways, as part of esports growing up and becoming an adult industry, um, is realizing there is now this responsibility. I wish more players would take a stand. I think it's sad we don't have a player equivalent of a Muhammad Ali, someone who says, "No, I'm not going to go and fight the Vietnamese. Fuck the draft." Something profound like that. I haven't really seen it. I think players get to skirt a little bit on that responsibility, but I think we all have a responsibility now to look at the world and make it clear, one way or the other, whereabouts it is we're going to stand. And in even saying I'm not getting political, it's esports, that is in itself a stand. You are essentially rejecting nominal premises, which, again, I wouldn't do it, but I certainly understand why a lot of organizations to run their businesses need to do it. I get it. um
Yeah, esports
America's
is in a
turned a blind
challenging part,
eye.
challenging
Yeah,
time right now.
The American government's turned a blind eye to the Uyghur Muslim issues, the genocide that's going on there, and everyone justifies doing business with China like it's just another day. So I mean, as I said, it's an industry of hypocrites, unfortunately, on these issues. Um, Moving on to more kind of interesting and positive stuff. I wanted to just get a temperature check about, where you feel professional Dota is going to go. I know this is like your greatest area of expertise. So I was very intrigued to see where you think Dota is going to go now that we don't have a DPC. And the way Valve kind of like pulled out of the DPC, they sort of magnanimously did it and said, hey, look, it'll be like the old days. Everyone will be running a tournament every weekend and it'll be rad. and that'll encourage competition in the scenes. And I was like, no, none of that's going to happen now.
Yeah.
There was a lot of doom and gloom around, the lack of the DPC, the lack of Valve involvement in a way, of having a narratively consistent competition for people at various levels of the game. Do you think it's a disaster that DPC isn't there anymore?
I do think it's pretty disastrous the way that it went away. Um, I think that has created all kinds of problems, which are kind of the ones we were just talking about. Is like now who's going to pay for everything, right? Saudi and Russia are saying we'll do it, right? And everybody's like, I guess that's what's happening, right? I guess that is where we're going. And I'll just do like a little context, I guess, if that's okay for people. Valve brought about the International in 2011 as $1 million esports tournament. Everybody was like, holy shit, this is actually real. It was, right? And then in 2014, they introduced the Battle Pass or the Compendium, which, the prize pool went from $1 million to, actually, wait, I think it was 2013. It went from like 1 million to like 2.6 million or something. And then in 2014, it went to like 8 million, right? And then later on, it was 40 million, right? It kind of grew and grew and grew, and it created this kind of ecosystem where publishers wanted to back esports, right? They saw all this money being generated through in-game hats and cosmetics, and they said, "Yeah, let's do this." And everybody copied it, and it led to the great funding of esport prize pools essentially. And there wasn't, and I think what publishers started to realize is that the sale of these cosmetics isn't necessarily driven by esports, right? It's really just driven by the players who play the game. And a lot of the players, or 90% of the players, don't really watch or care about esports
Yeah.
that much. So they're going to buy the hats regardless. Valve used to have all these cool rev share models where tournaments could attach an in-game item to their tournament ticket in game. And we saw Beyond the Summits event go from a 50K prize pool to a 250K prize pool. And Valve was like, that's a little much, right? Like, we're not going to give up that much money. We're going to take some of that back on our side. And I think the headaches of dealing with third parties just sort of weighed on Valve over the years. They said, this isn't worth the headache, right? They just kept pulling out, pulling out, pulling out. I think the developers, Valve less than everybody else, was like, wow, esports, this trending huge industry. Let's bring this in house. Let's control it, right? And that's kind of what like Blizzard and Riot have done, and all of the other ones like Supercell and Ubisoft, and they all try to just control the thing, which is just greedy of them, right? They hire their own internal teams to sort of manage it all, and it's not their expertise, right? They're game publishers. Just make the game, right? Let somebody else that actually loves this thing do it. And I think they just got greedy, and now it's created all of these problems. Now they've realized that it's not necessarily tied directly to their bottom line. So their stockholder, or their stockholders, their shareholders, their stakeholders are like, I used all those words because I'm not sure exactly which one applies here, but they decided that like, you got to kill these things, right? We got to lay off staff, right? Stock price, that has to go up. So that's kind of what's happening at the moment. The revenue wasn't growing. Speculative investors are dipping out left and right. And these esport programs have been built up to such a great level that, now the people who are still here, who are stuck here, right? The players, the teams, the event organizers, they have to find money to run these things. And that's why it's all going to Saudi and Russia, because they're willing to pay. There's not a way to sort of, oh, let's go over here, or let's shrink a little bit. Let's have a haircut, right? Let's go down 50%. 50% is still unsustainable. Like, nobody can afford this, right? There's no revenue being generated by these esport groups, and the revenue that is being generated is by these like really talented business development teams who are able to convince sponsors and partners that it's worth it. But
Mm-hmm.
I wager to believe that gambling is the only one that's actually succeeding on these conversions.
Yeah, I think so. I think as well. It's like it's a super easy thing to convert.
Yeah.
You sign up very often, particularly the betting sites that sponsor esports products. They
People
don't
love betting
ask
on
for the
esports.
ID. Yeah, they don't ask for ID or anything up front. You just sign up, deposit your money, you get your promo codes,
Yep.
you get your free bet, whatever it is, and you're away to go. And as I said, as a long term sports fan, if there's a big game and I'm going to watch it, yeah, I'll put some money on. I always do that. It just gives you a little bit of edge,
It
right?
helps you
For
feel like
reason.
you're part of the team almost, right?
Yeah,
You're
right. Yeah,
incentivizing the result. And that's kind of part of, I mean, not to go back to what we are talking about, but that's kind of what I'm trying to fix is like, how do we convince people to feel like they're more so a part of these teams? And
mm,
I think it's through crypto.
yeah. Well, I mean, listen. One thing I'll say as well, because I didn't mention it earlier, is even as a crypto skeptic, I think the blockchain like application is interesting to me, and I get that. It's just I think we sort of haven't really explored its full potential yet. And whenever I'm reading about it,
Yep.
I read there's an excellent book called Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, which is even within that, it is a condemnation of the technology itself. It says that essentially it can realistically only be used for these things, and only will be used for these things, and it's bad. But the more I read up on it, the more I kind of do wonder whether or not there is actually something to it. It's just unfortunately the hustlers and the grifter class got there first, and now everyone's left holding a big bag of shit.
It was
And
very unregulated, right? Which leads to scam and crime, which was rampant. So I think the boomers are starting to catch up on what blockchain and crypto is, right? Regulations are coming in. America, of course, lagging behind, but um, I think we're going to get there eventually. So there's a lot of, and we don't have to get into it today, and happy to talk about it another time. But there's a lot of opportunities that I think crypto unlocks for digital audiences, and I think it's going to just improve the product. I think it's going to convince fans that spending money on esports is actually worth it. And up until this day, like nobody's been able to figure it out except for sports gamblers. So yeah, the industry needs a facelift, and I'm only 32 at this point. I've got some years left in me. I think I'm going to try and figure it out.
yeah, well, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
I'm hoping I'm gonna be on a fucking beach somewhere sipping cocktails, and it could be your problem. But I wanted just while we're here as well, I want to ask just a bit about TI, because you brought it up a few times and kind of like the concept of crowdfunding. I've been, dunking on the Dota community for such a long period of time because they're just entitled babies at this point. They ask for things, they get them, and then they don't fucking, they don't like them because they're not how they imagined them, and it's like I can't do it with you people anymore. But there has been this thing that's been kind of intimated that actually even something as big as TI would be almost just an afterthought to Valve. They may or may not continue it as kind of a trend. I know I've had people say to me privately that like Valve staff get so pissed off with the feedback they have to read that actually they're just like, maybe we just don't do one year. And I just wanted to sort of ask about that possibility because I like as the Riyadh Masters and the Saudi circuit is now, it's got the Riyadh prize pool is going to overshadow the last TI
For
by
sure.
some distance. So I mean, do we even need TI? Is TI anything other than legacy and prestige at this point?
No, I think it is pretty much just legacy and prestige. And I think that the legacy part is kind of faded a little bit as well, right? Like we have more, a lot of people have their name on the ages at this point, right? And it's not as, yeah, maybe I'm biased, right? I got the first five, right? But um yeah, I think the legacy is kind of fading. People care less about it because it's not the center of esports, right? Like TI was this magical event that happened in Val's backyard. It was a celebration of Dota. And if you went this year, right, tickets were $800. It was a 3-day event. It was a fucking bottle of water was $15. It's like, you kind of felt like you felt like a real customer, I think, rather
Yeah,
than a fan.
yeah.
So it's definitely lost some of its allure. And I think that directly correlates with Valve's interest in operating it. The event was still fantastic, like production wise. And Valve and PGL, I think, did a really great job. But it's, Dota isn't this like warm, magical place that it used to be. I think.
Mm. Yeah, I had friends who attended, kind of similar complaints. They said it was almost like going to a concert more than an esports event. Is kind of the vibe they got. Um, and that's fine. I listen. I would be happy with Ti as it was this time around. I like have it completely esports focused. Have a more realistic prize pool. Um, I
Yeah,
never
but
really cared about the
the
cosmetics and the hats and the FOMO and the bullshit.
the beauty of it being such a large prize pool is that when a player won, their whole life feels justified up until that moment, right? Like
Sure.
you win life changing money. You're arguably set for life as long as you don't blow it. And, you've achieved your life stream. And I don't think that it's that anymore for most players, right? I think winning the 30 million or 10 million, whatever it is, right? That
Mm.
is the new, achievement of success.
For me, I always looked at it as if the way the Dota space was constructed, I always looked at it as if you're giving pros a choice, and the choice is this: do you want the enduring greatness of being Muhammad Ali by working hard, winning consistently, and doing it over time, or do you want to be Buster Douglas and knock Tyson out one time, get a ton of money and endorsements, and then you're a quiz question? And that's the problem I think I've always had with TI. It was so big in comparison to everything else. Everything was geared around it. If you ran a tournament a month before TI, no one wanted to go. We're not giving up our strats and our drafts. Fuck that. It ain't worth it.
Hmm.
It overshadowed the whole pro scene. And yeah, it's great to have that moment of a dude on stage crying because he thinks he's got life changing money. Spoiler: once the tax man's had 50% out of it, once the org have had their cut as well, which they get pre tax. Yeah, it ain't all that. It's still great, but it ain't as good as what many people think it is. Particularly if you were on one of those org contracts where they jack it up for their Dota team and they say, because I've seen the clauses, any prize over $1 million, we get 50% of. I've seen that in a number of contracts.
I
Um,
hope people aren't signing those. That's crazy.
that's real. So I get it, but it's a nice moment, but it's not like sustained success. It's like how empty everything else must seem, how demotivating going back to work on Monday must seem. It must be like winning the lottery and then like, am I going back to my cubicle? Probably not, actually. So that's the problem. I actually think, in terms of rubbernecking and bringing in outsiders, super successful. In terms of creating a sustainable ecosystem, super damaging.
Yeah, it definitely put a damper on other events, which was really exacerbated by the DPC, right? Like if you weren't an event like before there was the DPC, events used to take care of the players, right? They would, we were getting first class flights, we were getting solo rooms at our hotels, the prize pools were great. And then once the DPC came around, it was like as long as they had DPC points, players would go anywhere, right? And it could be horrible conditions and it could be a bad time, but if there's DPC points, the best teams would still come. So they've kind of walked back on that, but as we mentioned earlier, it's a little bit late to do that because the guys who are running those really cool events are gone. And people are optimistic, I think, about third parties sort of stepping in, but they're not the same guys that we used to know.
Yeah, yeah, which is fair. Um, you do have your own Dota League. I want to end
Sure.
on some positive stuff because you are the founder of NADCL, which is North American
Thank
Dota
you.
Challengers League, and we've shot the shit about this in the past. Running a league that's kind of, first of all, in what isn't always a great region for Dota, but also as well as kind of struggled, I think, because it's run parallel, back in the days of the DPC and stuff. I imagine it's been quite a challenge, and yet I love I just love grassroots leagues and sort of the idea of people doing more to support that. I think that's
Yep.
such an integral part of esports, and it's just kind of fallen by the wayside as we've chased the stadium dream.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, I run a Dota league. I used to run this league back in 2018, 2019 when I was a player. When I moved to Europe and joined NIP, I kind of shuttered things for a bit. But back then it was really a charity. Like I lost money on it. Like there was no way to there's tier two esports is so challenging to monetize, right? Like you can't compete for eyeballs. So you can't compete for, you can't entice sponsors to sort of get on board. And, if we go back to sponsors, right, conversion rates are horrible. They're all one-time relationships where the sponsor feels burned at the end of them. So yeah, this league was really how do we innovate a tier two league to provide opportunities for tier two players? And our league is pretty unique. I think we've got a little bit of a spin, and this is part of my quest to create better digital products for esport fans to spend money on. So our league this season has 12 teams, and they are run by our team owners. The team owners, they all put in like $500 and they get to draft a roster. Players compete in a player combine, which is a one weekend in-house league. And then they get drafted by the team owners to their teams. And then it's kind of like, we have like private Discord channels where all the owners are, talking shit and complaining to me about how the league's unfair. And uh, all the players, are down in the pits, getting mad at each other, telling their owners to make changes to the rosters. And, we've changed our format each season. We're now in season 6. We've ran seasons 4 and 5 in 2023. We're in season 6 now. Yeah, I actually charge players to play, right? That's a big, it's $20 if you want to join. You $20, you get a season pass to compete in all of our events. And so we have the main product where it's like group stage into playoff bracket. Those are your teams that are drafted by the team
That's how we
owners.
used to do it as well. I mean, people don't know. Like people don't remember the days of like
Yeah.
literally we used to pay to play, carry our own computer to events, all of that stuff.
We sold over 200 player passes for like almost $4,000. We sold 8 team owner slots for another $4,000, and our prize pool is like $10,000. So, I lose a little bit myself, but it's a hobby, right? It's like I don't go out to the movies, right? I run Dota leagues. That's what I do for fun.
Yeah.
And people pay to play because what is the product that we're selling, right? I'm running a league for you to have opportunities. You should pay to participate, right? I'm not, it's not, I shouldn't be tasked with running the league and figuring out how to find money for it. You know what I mean? Like
No,
it's an impossible task. Especially when most of these players don't have any fans, right? They have no brands, they have no things. So yeah, basically all of my team owners are well-off individuals who love Dota and don't have anything cool to spend money on. So they get a team in my league. I've been trying to attract more streamers and larger personalities to sort of, grow it at a faster rate, but everybody's kind of busy in their own little fantasy world of fake esports, in my opinion. So it's kind of tough. But I think we're going to make progress season after season, and I'm just going to keep doing it for a couple of years and see where it ends up.
Well, as I've offered privately, listen, if you ever want someone who just recalibrated at 3K and is fucking devastated about it, to come and do some fucking dog shit commentary just for freak show value.
What's your day rate these days?
I'd do it for free, man. Like real
All right.
talk, like 100%. I'd do it just for the fun, just to say, because I've never commentated a Dota game.
We should have a celebrity
events.
cast when we get to the playoffs.
Dude,
I'll send you a message.
me and Anders would totally rock that shit. Like,
okay, let's do it.
I can't say he'd do it for free. But I don't know about him.
Okay.
But me, I'll do it for fun. I gotta, that's my game of choice these days. I ain't got no time for Counter-Strike. I haven't had for a long time. I sit down and play Dota of an evening when I get the rare free time. I do. And I the guys I play with, they're all in the Reddit Dota League. They played RD2L.
Yep.
So it's like I do appreciate how important these grassroots things are to sort of advancing people's careers and helping people improve. So anything to do with helping that, that'd just be so like you. I don't watch movies. I write about esports grifters in my spare
I appreciate
time,
it.
so
and NA Dota is probably the smallest demographic of Dota players in the world, but it's it's where I'm from, right? It's what I'm passionate about. It's where I have these connections. I do have aspirations of sort of growing it and taking it to other regions, but it just takes time and it takes money. And I personally think it takes a lot of innovation because the esports industry is just so there isn't real revenue behind it. So how do we sort of fix it, right? This is kind of like my little experiment. And if I can prove out a real model that works, right, maybe it's scalable, right? And that's, we try to automate a lot of our stuff. I have a great in-house developer who works for free. He's kind of like, he's like the number 2 on the league. And yeah, we're basically like building out our own tournament platform to sort, or like our own like events platform. So got a little tech product on the side that I'm working on. So
Nice, man. Well,
it's cool.
you got to stay busy, brother, because this industry it'll throw curveballs at you.
Yeah,
So I appreciate that. But look, we're at time, and I know you've got meetings all day because that's what you do now that you're a high-powered executive.
true. I
Uh,
do have some stuff to do. So I really appreciate your time. I'm one of your biggest fans. You're very opinionated. I like it because I always know where you stand, right? And I
yeah,
appreciate
right.
that.
Well, I don't know why more people just cut the bullshit. The industry would be so much better if everybody could just come out and say what they really felt. We'd just be in so much of
Let's
a better place.
let's agree to keep doing it.
Yeah, man. So look, anything you want to shout out just before I let you go? Any final thoughts? What you want to tell people to sign up to
Shh.
Nouns on social media?
If you like Dota, come check out my Dota League, NA Dota Esports on Twitter. If you want to see a crazy, weird, interesting crypto esports team try and figure shit out, definitely come check out Nouns Esports. It's a very collaborative group, and we give a lot of people their first opportunity to really gain some experience in this industry, which is filled with nepotism, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Thank you for the
certainly is.
podcast, and
No,
until next
happy
time.
to do it, brother. Yeah, right. And there you have it, guys. Make sure you follow and support PPD. Again, opinionated like me. So if you just put your little baby feelings to one side and recognize the net good and go and support people trying to make a positive change in an industry full of bullshit. There it is. That's the episode. I'm out. I'll see you next time. Take care. Much love.